He was the head of World Airways. World Airways had been a significant charter and transport company that was hired by the American government to bring troops and supplies in and out of Vietnam. And he made a lot of money in that business for the 10 years before. His We first heard about him because he had wanted to evacuate some women and children, refugees supposedly from Da Nang, and flew up there with one of his planes, and the plane was taken over by South Vietnamese soldiers, and there were happened to be reporters on board that plane, so a lot of it was been captured on video, and that story became very well known.
From the cockpit, the pilots reported by radio that the situation was out of control. High-ranking officers in Da Nang have fled, leaving soldiers and airmen to fend for themselves. The hordes tried to jam up the stairway as Daly himself tried to block the stairs. As men clambered over one another, pushing aside women and children in their panic-stricken fury, members of the air crew dragged them onto the plane, trying to fill it as fast as possible. The tension and panic intensified. The heavily armed men were menacing. They left their wives, their children, their aged parents on the runway while they forced their own way on board, a rabble of young enlisted men.
And so it was certainly big news for us in Saigon, both the fact that Daly had gone through this experience and also the fact that it meant that Da Nang was falling, which was very significant for us. So that's how I first heard about him. So he was well known and talked about in a lot of newspapers and radio stories, just the stories of what was happening with him. Meanwhile, we were at that point, in early April, late March, early April, we knew that, and it was becoming increasingly clear to us that we were going to have to leave soon. And so here we are in a house filled with kids. The kids were in our physical custody, obviously. They were also in our legal custody because they'd been handed over to us by the orphanages. And there was no place that we could, you can't just leave the kids in the house. You can't take them back somewhere. There's no place to take them to. So the kids had to come with us. There was just never any question about that. And they were in the adoption pipeline anyway. They all would have come eventually, but we needed to take them all at once. So we went to the governments, both the Americans and the Vietnamese, and we said, we've got this problem. We need to leave. We've got all these kids. Can we just take them out? Well, you needed an exit visa to leave Vietnam and an entrance visa to go to the United States, as well as passports and all the other stuff that was required under a normal transport situation. So eventually, the Vietnamese agreed to let them out without an exit visa, and the Americans said, well, we will let them in to the United States without an entrance visa under a probationary immigration status. So we said, oh, that sounds great. Well, where's the plane? And they go, there's no plane. You've got to find your own plane. We're just told you we'll let them in once you arrive. So we thought, oh my gosh. So I spent a couple of days searching for an airplane. We went to Pan Am and Flying Tigers and Air America and the other airlines that we could get a hold of there. And everybody, smiled and said, sorry, I wish we could help you, but our flights are overbooked as they are right now. So we didn't know really what to do. And then we heard about Ed Daly, that maybe he would have a plane available for us. And it turns out he was originally going to take out kids from another organization, but that the embassy had convinced them not to fly with him. So I didn't fully appreciate this at the time. We just knew that he was available at the airport and he might have a plane. So I went to the airport and found him there in a cafeteria sort of conference room and met with him. He was a crazy character. I mean, it's hard to even imagine the story, but we walked in. He's sitting at this big table, and when I walked in the room, this was the scene. He's sitting at a table. On one side of him, there's a half full bottle of whiskey. Sitting on the other side of him is a pistol lying on the table, and there's a little nun on her knees in front of this table, sobbing, crying. I couldn't understand exactly what was going on, but that was the scene I walked into. And he, kind of stood up, pulled his wallet out, grabbed a fistful of bills, handed it to this little nun, and she's thank you, thank you, thank you, and left the room. And then he looks up and says, what do you want? I said, well, may I approach? and went up to the table and said, I understand that you might be willing to take out some orphans. I've got a house full of orphans, and we need help. And he said, "Yeah, I may be able to help you." So we talked about that for a while, and ultimately, I said, "Look, we've got permission from the South Vietnamese government to take these kids out. I've got a letter, but I'm not sure the guy downstairs at the airport, the guy that's standing at the gate, is he gonna know that he's supposed to let us all out? And Daly said, I'll take care of that. And I didn't know exactly what he meant, but I think he meant that he still had another wallet in his pocket that was going to manage to get us through that gate. So he said, we'll see what we can do. Maybe I'll call you in a day or two or three, and we'll see if we can't get your kids out. So I said, great. So we left. We went over to the embassy to say, hey, guess what? We're going to go with Ed Daly. And they said, oh, don't go with him. He's a drunk. He's a fool. His plane's not safe. You shouldn't go with him. And so we walked out of there and we looked at each other and we said, we're going with Daly. Because the embassy, we weren't going to let them stop us if we had a plane ready to take our kids to the U.S. So we went back home that night. We had two houses at that point, one that was in town near the airport and the place that I was staying way out in the countryside. So I drove out to the countryside house and, didn't hear anything and didn't think anything was going to happen anytime soon. When about 9 o'clock, I get a phone call from the folks that were in town and they said, Daly's done it. He's ready to go. He's going to take our kids. Oh my gosh. When? Right now, tonight. We're going tonight. Oh my God. I couldn't believe it. All the kids had gone to bed. And so, what we decided is that we would take all of the kids all the older kids, which were in the house where I lived, and maybe a couple of younger kids, but mostly it would just be the older kids, put them all on the plane and let them go. So some of the people from town came out with a couple of vans, and I had my van, and we woke up the kids, and the kids are all confused, and I said, "We're going to America tonight." They didn't believe it. Really? Well, VC are coming, right? We're evacuating. We're scared. No, we're going to America today. So we loaded them in the van, and we drive into town. It was about a 45-minute drive, and I'm singing "California, Here I Come" as we're driving with the kids to the airport. Finally got out there, and there was, sure enough, the plane. We were escorted out directly onto the runway, right to the steps of the plane. And I walked up the steps to look inside the plane, and my first words were, "Seats. There's Mr. Daly, there's no seats in this airplane. Where are all the kids going to go?" We don't need no stinking seats. We got blankets. They can lie on the floor. Okay. So we loaded the kids on the plane. At one point, some soldiers came on and grabbed three of our older boys, the three oldest boys, and said, "Oh, they're too old to go here. They're draft age. They should be fighting for their country. They can't go to America." So they kicked them off the flight, but we managed to get them out on later flights. But that was the Ed Daly getting on the plane. And so the story is that after we got all the kids loaded on the plane, apparently we didn't know this at the time, but apparently someone had decided that they weren't going to clear the plane for takeoff. And so when the pilot radioed to the tower to say, we're ready for takeoff, they said, no, you can't take off. You're not cleared to take off. You may not take off. And the story is that Ed Daly got on the mic and he just said, "Oh yeah, just watch me." And so they taxied out to the beginning of the runway. The tower cut off the lights to the runway so they wouldn't be able to take off. But later, someone was interviewing the pilot and he said, "Well, the lights were turned off. How did you take off?" And he said, "Well, I pushed the accelerator forward and we took off."
Yeah, we went.
So,
and do I understand correctly that this actually ended up being kind of a catalyst for Operation Baby Lift to,
I think it very much did. They were very angry with us when the plane, first took off with Daly, and they were going to punish him because the plane wasn't safe and that kind of thing. But quickly, the sentiment in the United States became that he's a hero, actually, and he saved these children. And I think that some people thought that this would be we could exploit the the orphans to try to engender sympathy from the Americans that would might instill or inspire Congress to give more money to save the country. And I think the ambassador, in fact, was very much behind the baby lift for that somewhat selfish, arguably, motivation rather than to help the kids, but it was rather to help them look like Vietnam needed sympathy. Um, but there was also, I think, Ford himself was adopted, and so he was sympathetic. I think more than many. I think there were both motivations, both a genuine sympathy for the kids as well as the larger political impetus for it. But I think that they saw the sympathy that Daly had earned from his effort and thought, wow, that's a great idea. We should take out all those kids, take out more kids. So it was just a couple of days later that Ford said, I've asked for $2 million to be made available to escort 2,000 children outside of, out of Vietnam. And from that point on, all the flights left from Saigon and went, on military planes, C-140s mostly, and went to the Philippines. And in the Philippines, the kids would be checked for health and that kind of thing, stay there for a day or two, and then get on an Air Force chartered, passenger plane, normal passenger plane, and fly to the United States.